Rebecca Vannest joins us now. She's a professor for the School of Education and Human Services at Oakland University. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So give us a little bit of your background.
Sure, I'd love to. So I started my career out as a school counselor for many years as an elementary, middle school, and high school counselor. And while I was doing that, I pursued my doctorate in mental health counseling and since have become a play therapist. So the majority of my career has been spent with children, adolescents, and families. And then I was lucky to transition to Oakland University's counseling department.
Well, congratulations for joining Oakland University. Before we get into play therapy, I want to ask you about the kids today. They grow up so fast. When you're talking to a middle school or a high schooler, I'm like, how did you guys get so smart, but also so adult?
Well, I think it can be actually a little intimidating for a lot of people to think about talking to a middle schooler or a high school. Sometimes it's hard to remember what we felt like at that age. But my experience has just been that they want people to be real and authentic and connect with them as people. You know, they're on the verge of thinking about growing up and being an adult. And they certainly have a lot of challenges that they face. And I think what they want from us is just authenticity and being real with them.
What advice do you give to parents? Because the kids have technology today. We didn't. Remember, we used to be able to dial someone up. That was even before star 69, so they didn't get your number and say, hey, is your refrigerator running? You better go catch it. You know, kids today, you can't really do that, right? Technology has changed their experiences.
Yes, and I think what's important to remember, though, is that technology has always been a little bit scary when we think about the next generation coming up. You know, we've had televisions and everyone was worried about that. We were all worried about the rise of cell phones, and now we have social media. And it is certainly, it can be a positive or a negative depending on what you yourself bring to that relationship. So I think it's really important as adults that we, you know, model healthy relationships with social media, which we don't always do very well for the next generation, and that we, you know, teach those coming up that it's about what you bring to it, and it's about having a healthy relationship, taking breaks from it, being just as appropriate or trying to be appropriate online, just like you would be if you were in person saying something to someone's face. Let's not kind of lose control online and say things we wouldn't normally say in regular life, if you will.
Rebecca Vannest with us here on the MegaCast. She's a professor for the School of Education and Human Services at Oakland University. Things have changed so greatly over the past year because of the pandemic. What's it been like for you and how you counsel some of these students?
Well, it's all about adapting very quickly. So I've tried to switch gears. Luckily, I did have some experience with teaching and counseling online before the pandemic. So I tried to make sure to be very creative. I do things like, you know, as people are logging on, sometimes I have some music playing in the background. When I'm teaching classes, I make sure to have an icebreaker. I have people, my students often go on a scavenger hunt, say, let's find the, you know, silliest, most outrageous thing in your house. And it's an icebreaker where we can get to know each other very quickly. And, you know, for some folks, it's very nice and convenient if transportation's an issue, if it's hard to get out of the house, as it certainly has been for all of us. It's a wonderful opportunity to still allow people to get the services they desperately need by having the online education and the online counseling.
I'm hoping that one of the positives that comes out of this pandemic, our ability to talk about mental health issues, because we have all felt it to some degree or another throughout this COVID-19 crisis. How is it going with your students? Are they more open now than maybe they were before?
So that is my hope as well. I think this is the pandemic within the pandemic is mental health. And if there's a silver lining here, I do think there has been growing awareness and normalization that we all are humans and that we do have these mental health struggles that we don't need to be ashamed of. But overall, I have just been incredibly impressed with the graduate students I have the privilege to teach. Some of them wouldn't have necessarily chosen to go to school online, but we've tried to reframe this into, how can we learn about this? This is an extra job skill that they now have instead of being in the field for 20 years and all of a sudden trying to do online telehealth. They have a chance to learn how to do this at the very beginning of their careers. And so I think with a little coaching and a little reframing, I've been extremely impressed with how my students have taken to the process. And, in some ways, there's actually some benefits to it. We often have all the tiles on the screen as I'm teaching a class, and we do a lot with body language and facial expression as counselors. And so in some ways, it's easier to see what we're doing with our faces and our bodies and how we might be coming across because we are on screen.
So with that, I know one of the therapies that you've been focused on throughout your career is play therapy. Can you give us some background into that?
Absolutely. I love talking about it. So the common misconception about play therapy is people think, well, it's just playing. How could that be beneficial or therapeutic for the child? So one of the challenges we have with working with young children is they're unable to verbalize like an adult might be able to through talk therapy. And we consider to be play to be the language of childhood. So as play therapists, instead of asking the child to come up to our level to verbalize like an adult might, we try to meet them where they are at by incorporating the modality of play therapy and a variety of toys. Kind of think of a children's museum type atmosphere where everything is carefully curated for them for specific purposes. So children think that they are just playing, but the play therapist is trained to observe what they are doing, to reflect to the child, and to even enter into the child's world and talk to them through their play, rather than sitting down a child and trying to talk to them one-on-one and saying, this is really important, I need you to hear this. What do they immediately do? Like, oh, I can't be bothered with this. But if we enter their play, they're very receptive to the messages we might have to give to them.
Rebecca Vannest with us here on the MegaCast. She's a professor for the School of Education and Human Services at Oakland University, and we're talking about play therapy. We are very familiar from watching crime dramas and SVU how they will use drawing and dolls and things of that nature to try to reach kids. How is this different from that?
So I actually brought a few props, if you don't mind. So one of the things we do with play therapy is we allow the child to come up with kind of self-direct in terms of what they want to play with. So say a child has a doll and we have our nice mask here, they have a puppet and they are playing with the puppet. Rather than myself talking directly to the child, I will actually realize that they're playing with a puppet, get a puppet myself, and the puppets will talk to each other and interact rather than me as the therapist kind of talking down to the child. Instead, I will sort of enter their world and the child thinks they're having a ball. They get that little twinkle in their eye like they're doing something fun and like the adult is engaging with them. And then I can use the puppets to I will notice the metaphors and sort of the themes of the child's expression because they project their inner world into the toy they're playing with. And then I will use my skills as a therapist to respond to them in kind, but using techniques and verbalization that will be therapeutic for the child.
Those are awesome puppets. I don't know where you got them, but they're so much better than when I was a kid. Rebecca Vannest with us here on the MegaCast. And with that, what age group does this work best for, and can it be translated into college students and even into a workplace?
Absolutely. One of the best ways to translate play therapy into any age is actually sand tray therapy. So I also have another prop for that, and this is a very rudimentary example, but essentially you have the sand. You have a giant sand tray that's often a wooden area with sand in it, and then you have in a fully equipped playroom, you're going to have hundreds and hundreds of different types of miniatures, and they're in different domain areas. For instance, you have nature, you have fencing, you have different types of families, and you might ask any age of a person to make a world in the sand. And essentially what they are doing is sort of unhinging their psyche and projecting into the sand tray. And it's kind of unbelievable to even do it as an adult, to see how much you project the inner conflicts you're having, sort of how you see the world. And then they're asked to describe that to the therapist, and the therapist will interact with them within the metaphor of that world they have created. And this can be done with any age of people very successfully. It can also be done with children that are pre-verbal. Play therapy is approved even down to age 2. So the therapist is trained to notice the metaphors and the things the child is gravitating to, and also the way they play with it, to assist them in processing, for instance, trauma that they are unable to verbalize.
And can wives use this as therapy on their husbands who tend to not be verbal as well?
Well, with the appropriate training.
Rebecca Vannest with us. She's a professor for the School of Education and Human Services at Oakland University. Do you think the telehealth for counseling is going to stick around?
Without question. I think it solves some really important problems for us, such as access. Many people, struggle to leave their homes, maybe feel uncomfortable leaving their homes. There may not be an available therapist who's close by. Transportation could be an issue. Childcare could be an issue. So I think, again, a silver lining to the pandemic is that it's really opened all of our eyes to the possibilities where maybe before we thought, well, what about this? What about this? Or it's uncomfortable. And now we've sort of broken the ice. So let's use this to help people and improve access to mental health care. And, I'm certainly going to be happy, though, to get back to in-person when that is safe and healthy.
I know. I think so many of us just miss people.
I do, for sure.
And I keep warning people that watch out, because I'm a hugger. And I know it's probably going to be a couple years before people are going to be comfortable with meeting people for the first time, and you hug them or shake their hand or something of that nature. But some habits are hard to break.
Yeah, we're going to have to renegotiate what it's like to be social, like sticking out your hand for a handshake. We might not be comfortable with that anymore. So we're all going to have to sort of relearn how to be social.
I will say, I remember this police officer years ago, Rebecca. I used to be a reporter, and I went to shake his hand around the scene of something, and he's like, I don't shake hands. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, I felt like, oh, what? And now he'd fit right in, but he really had kind of, the right thing, saying, everyone and germs and this, that, and the other. But at the time, it just came across as so rude. Now, you're rude if you ask to shake someone's hand.
So true. I know. And it's a little anxiety provoking to try to figure out all these new rules and wonder what it's going to be like when we go back and learn all this again.
So before we say goodbye, anything maybe I didn't ask about that you want to add to the conversation?
Sure. Yes, I'd love to talk about, we are in the process of creating a play therapy center at Oakland University. It's a very exciting new initiative we have in the Department of Counseling. So we already have an existing counseling center that's available for free to the public, and we are expanding that and a new training program for graduate students, hopefully fall of 2022. And we are currently, I'm working with Anthony Galena in the Dean's Office at the School of Education and Human Services to work with our corporate and philanthropic partners to sort of equip our existing center for play therapy and to get this great program off the ground that's really something that social workers, psychologists, counselors, school counselors, all the mental health professions really respect the modality of play therapy. So we're really excited to make this expansion in the Department of Counseling.
That is awesome. I think the timing is really going to be perfect because as we enter on the backside of this crisis and the pandemic, I think that's when, as a society, we're really going to start to grasp the severity of the mental health impact that this has had on all of us. So we appreciate people such as yourself for studying this and also being there to support us when we need to be lifted up.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure, so thank you.
Well, thank you again for being with us. Rebecca Vannest, she's the professor for the School of Education and Human Services for Oakland University. It's been great having you, and happy St. Patrick's Day.
You too. Thanks for having me.